there's only so much steak in the world. Make sure you don't ruin any of this precious limited resource by avoiding these common missteps.
There's one thing standing between a tender, buttery steak and meat as chewy as a rubber tire. What's the trick? Gordon Ramsay has the answer. Let's face it, the way you defrost steak matters. While there are several methods for defrosting steak, some are much better at helping you achieve the desired results you're looking for than others. The safest way, according to Masterclass, is to place the frozen steak in the refrigerator and allow the temperature of the meat to slowly increase. But unfortunately, for all you last-minute planners out there, this can easily take over a day. Another way requires submerging the food in cold water to slowly change its temperature, or defrosting it in the microwave. Which defrosting method you choose will likely depend on the amount of time you have and a few other factors, but you'll want to know they are not all created equal, and one is particularly unfavorable for steak, according to Gordon Ramsay. Even if defrosting steak in the microwave is the quickest method, Ramsay tells Masterclass it's best to avoid it altogether, unless you have no other option. He says the microwave method works well for food like veggies and pasta sauces, but meat? Not so much. It can wreak havoc on a beautiful piece of beef, causing discoloration and a rubbery texture.
Overcooked to blue!
And beyond potentially ruining your steak, defrosting in the microwave is pretty easy to mess up, which can lead to things worse than a disappointing meal. Meat thawed in the microwave can turn questionable quickly due to its ability to rapidly enter the danger zone, which is what the USDA calls temperatures between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Dangerous bacteria thrive in this range, which can cause food poisoning. If you absolutely must defrost steak in the microwave, the kitchen says to cook it as soon as possible. For Masterclass, Hell's Kitchen star Gordon Ramsay recommends a cold water bath as his preferred method for thawing steak, as ribeye and other cuts of steak can take days to thaw in the fridge, depending on their size. With this defrosting method, you can expedite thawing while still putting safety first. You'll want to place the steak in a resealable or vacuum-sealed plastic bag, which Grilling Dad says will help prevent any cross-contamination. Avoid hot water, as this can cause dangerous bacterial growth while your steak is brought up to the correct temperature. And use a spoon or other utensil to help hold the meat down. After being fully submerged for 30 minutes, you can begin checking to see if it is thawed, swapping the water out for new, per the U.S. Food Safety and Inspection Service. Ramsay says you'll know when the steak is ready to be cooked when it feels soft and fleshy. Any signs of ice or hardness mean that it must continue soaking for longer. But in general, the cold water method takes around 45 minutes per pound of beef. The reason a microwave will produce an unpleasant steak is twofold. The first is that ice does not absorb microwaves as well as water. This is because the chemical compound of ice is locked more rigidly into place, so when some of the ice does melt, the melted water will continue to absorb the microwaves instead of the remaining ice. The second issue is that the penetration of a microwave only reaches between 1/4 of an inch to an inch. A thick slab of meat then won't be radiated all the way to its center. In short, a microwave is simply not the right tool for the job. When you submerge your steak, make sure it's not warm, as that could promote the growth of bacteria. You could let the meat thaw in the refrigerator, but large ice crystals form when food remains just under the freezing point for too long. If you follow Ramsay's advice, however, you will bypass that problem.
Seasoning a frozen steak? Defrosting a steak too quickly? Too slowly? Keep watching to find out what the biggest mistakes everyone makes with frozen steaks are and what to do instead. If you freeze top-quality steaks, chances are they're going to change color from a bright, appetizing red to a gray or brown color. And that's okay. While studies have shown that discoloration is off-putting to consumers, with 15% of beef discounted due to color change alone, this change is actually perfectly safe. According to Science of Cooking, when meat is vacuum-packed close to the time of processing, oxygen molecules are pulled away from the surface of the meat, which turns its surface a browner color. So while discoloration at the retail level contributes to significant food waste and economic loss, seeing a slightly off color to your frozen meat definitely does not mean it should be trashed. Indeed, Science of Cooking notes, cutting it open will reveal that this discoloration has only happened at the surface level, nothing to fear. Of course, you should never eat meat that's gone off or is spoiled, but this, according to myth crushers, is better recognized not by color, but by texture. In addition to its odor, meat that has gone off can be recognized by the tacky sheen that forms on the surface. In this case, of course, you should dispose of the meat without consuming it. If you grew up watching your mom put frozen food on the counter first thing in the morning so that it thawed in time for dinner, you may be tempted to treat your steaks the same way. But the truth is that if your steaks are frozen sous vide, you don't actually have to defrost them at all. Sip by Go highlights a great method for cooking frozen steaks by first thawing them in a sous vide bath for 60 minutes. The result is improved texture over defrosting in the fridge or on the countertop, which is more dangerous and should be avoided, according to the USDA. Plus, it means you don't have to decide what you're having for dinner before you've even had breakfast. Cook the Story, meanwhile, notes that you can actually begin cooking your steaks without defrosting them at all. Simply sear the frozen steaks in very hot oil and then finish them in the oven. They'll cook all the way through, no defrosting needed. If you're cooking your steaks right from frozen, you may find that it changes the normal order of your cooking method. Notably, it means that you're going to want to season your steaks after you begin cooking them. Much has been written about the perfect time to season steaks, with some, like Serious Eats, claiming that the best time is about 40 minutes before cooking, and others, like the Los Angeles Times, claiming that it's best to season right before cooking, or better yet, when the steak is already in the pan. But when it comes to cooking a steak from frozen, you want to season after the sear, according to Epicurious. This, of course, makes sense when you think about it. Seasoning will not adhere to the dry, hard surface of an unthawed steak. For Epicurious, then, the best course of action is to sear, then season, then finish your steaks in the oven. The result will be a perfectly seasoned surface and a tender, wonderfully cooked steak.
Ignorance is bliss.
In most cases, when cooking meat, whether frozen or fresh, you sear the meat first and finish cooking it at a lower temperature, in the oven, for example, or in a liquid as for a braise. However, many proponents of frozen steak prefer the reverse sear method, and it's a great technique to try at home. For Serious Eats, the reverse sear method affords quite a few advantages over a more typical steak cooking order. Not only is reverse searing less of a time crunch, as it affords more flexibility in cooking time, but it paves the way for not only a browner crust, but also a more tender center. And since frozen beef is often starting out colder in the center, it's the ideal insurance policy for even cooking throughout. To reverse sear steak, you first cook it through in the oven, only searing the crust just before serving. It takes a bit longer than more traditional cooking methods, but you'll soon see it's worth it. We all know how it goes. You had your eye on a lovely steak for dinner, but something else came up, and now you're stuck with a defrosted piece of meat you've got to eat fast. Or do you? Myths of the health hazards of refreezing beef have been greatly exaggerated. But if you do want to refreeze previously frozen meat, there are a few safety protocols to follow to reduce the risk of foodborne illness. According to Kansas City Steaks, it's safe to refreeze steak, and for that matter other meat, if it has been defrosted at fridge temperature and has never reached room temperature, or at least not for more than 2 hours. The USDA adds that while there may be moisture loss when refreezing previously frozen meat, meaning a drier steak when you finally do dig in, from a food safety perspective, it is indeed fine to refreeze previously frozen food, whether still raw or cooked, if the food was thawed in the fridge.
Could the timing of butter make or break your seasoned steak? Keep watching to learn more about this and other mistakes you've been making when seasoning steaks. Salt is the primary go-to accompaniment for steak. However, the type of salt you use is just as important as the salt itself. Regular old super fine-grained table salt is not the ideal salt for seasoning steaks, but most people often use it because it's what they have in the pantry already. Kosher salt is what most chefs universally recommend for steaks. The actual flakes in kosher salt are much thicker, and therefore cover the surface of the steak more efficiently. It's certainly easier to confirm you've seasoned the entire exterior of the steak when you can see the actual salt crystals. When it comes to beef, it's essential to use salt liberally when seasoning, and it's usually a lot more salt than you might initially deem necessary. Pros know that if you want every bite to have flavor, especially when it's a thick cut of meat, be sure to aggressively salt every square inch of that steak.
1-inch thick top sirloin steak. Salt and pepper heavily. Grill at 400. 4 minutes total. Flip each minute to get the good grill marks. Let sit for 2 minutes. Down the hatch.
As the Spruce Eats points out, you aren't just eating the top part of the meat. The salt needs to coat every surface of the steak. This also helps form the crust-like consistency of a supremely cooked steak. The exception to this rule of using a hefty amount of salt per steak score is if you're cooking dry-aged steak. Because the process pulls moisture out of the meat, not as much salt is required when steaks are prepped with this method. Some people advocate for seasoning steak just before cooking, while others suggest letting the seasoned steak sit in the fridge up to a day or even 2 days before cooking. Otto Wild recommends salting 40 minutes prior to cooking, again just before cooking and right after cooking. Regardless which path you choose, there is one move you should absolutely avoid. A common mistake, according to Ula, is letting the steak get to room temperature on the counter before seasoning it. Letting a piece of raw steak from the fridge reach room temperature with seasoning on it helps the meat to absorb all the seasoning's flavoring as it warms up. The result is a more supple final steak. Ideally, the route should be taking the steak out of the fridge, seasoning it, then letting it sit on the counter with the seasoning for at least 40 to 50 minutes before cooking. We suggest that if you have the time, season the steak, then place it in the fridge overnight. This is essentially dry brining the steak, a popular seasoning technique. Believe it or not, how you apply the salt might be negatively impacting the outcome of your steak. Many times, people cooking steaks at home don't take into consideration the technique they're using to apply their seasoning. If you want to ensure an even coating of salt, try to hold your hand about 2 feet above the piece of meat as you liberally sprinkle the salt onto it. Then, once the surface of the meat is fully coated in the salt, the Pioneer Woman recommends using your hands to press the salt flakes into the steak. The reasoning behind this is very simple and probably exactly what you'd assume. It helps the salt to stick to the meat. And remember to place the steak on a wire rack over a foiled-lined sheet pan after seasoning so the air can fully circulate around the meat. If you are searing a steak at home and want that awesome, perfectly salty crust you'd expect from a restaurant steak, there is a simple tweak you can make prior to doing any of your seasoning. Do not make the mistake of skipping the part where you use a paper towel to gently pat the raw steak until it's dry before adding any seasoning to it. The paper towel blotting technique is very simple to execute and might not seem like a necessary step, but it's essential for getting the best possible outcome with the cooked steak.
The steak is incredible. I'm glad you're all enjoying it.
It's important to be cognizant of the cut of meat when you're deciding on the best way to season it, and very often people do not take this into account when they start the seasoning process. The main factor here is that some cuts might do better with an actual legit liquid marinade first, as opposed to ones that just need a sprinkling of dry ingredients like salt and pepper. The majority of steak cuts require little more than salt to season sufficiently. However, certain steaks, such as hanger, flank, or skirt, are inherently tougher, and therefore we advise that you marinate these cuts for 4 hours or even overnight prior to cooking. While a liquid marinade can technically be used for more tender cuts like ribeye, it definitely isn't required, and the use of a liquid marinade can overwhelm the flavor of the meat and decrease the potential for that nice browning of the steak in the cooking process. Butter is the secret ingredient to enhancing richness and flavor in a lot of high-quality restaurant steaks. But if you're going to employ this hack in your own kitchen, make sure you do it at the exact right time in the cooking process. Some folks might think that you can slap some butter on prior to cooking the steak and get juicier results. According to Kitchen Sear, the key is actually adding butter to the steak after it finishes cooking, then letting the meat rest a bit before serving. That resting period is a great time for the butter to melt over the top of the meat and yield a nice shiny sheen on the top. If you try to cook the steak with butter on it, you can end up with burnt-tasting steak because butter has a relatively low smoke point. If you really want to get wild, use compound butter, which is basically butter mixed with other ingredients to make it an even more flavorful steak.
Grilling a steak is an art form to some, but there are several common ways to ruin a masterpiece. From not pat drying to over flipping and not getting the grill hot enough, here are the most common mistakes cooks make when grilling steak. Not all steaks are created equal, and choosing the right cut of meat will make a big difference when tossing it onto the grill. The first mistake people make with meat is buying poor quality cuts. Frederick Dallaire, executive chef at Lowe's Miami Beach Hotel, said, "Meat is like electronics. Buy cheap and you will be very disappointed. Buy the best meat you can, grass-fed, organic, choice meat or better, not select. Buy a thick cut of steak. Thin cuts overcook easily, but a thick one will be more forgiving." Joy Bebert, executive chef and co-owner of Joy Cafe in Atlanta, agrees. She says, "A thick cut allows for control and for the fire to infuse more flavor. It also gives a little room for error. Once you choose that steak, be forgiving with the fat too. Fat is not a bad thing. People often trim all the fat off of meat thinking it's bad for them. According to Dallaire, that's where the flavor is. He says to leave some fat. That way it will melt during cooking and give great flavor to the meat. Now that you have your perfect steak, it's time to cook. When it comes to mistakes when grilling meat, it's first things first, and not having a clean grill is often mistake number 1. This may seem obvious, but it's an easy one to miss. Olivier Senyusawi, executive chef at the Lowe's Atlanta Hotel, is very specific when he says, "You must have a clean grill and clean it as you go. This will help create a proper sear and prevent burning." But honestly, why wouldn't you want a clean grill before getting started? Beyond the obvious reasons, it's also a way to avoid stale flavors from another dinner carrying over. Once you have a clean grill, you need to think about the right use of a heat source. Using fuel to start your grill when cooking with charcoal is another mistake. Senyusawi says, burning fuel to start the grill can make meat taste funny. Use a chimney starter to light charcoal, which is available at any hardware store. And then respect that grill by using the right tools on it. Using a fork to turn meat on the grill is a crime. When you pierce a piece of meat, all of the flavor will be released. Instead, flip your meat by using tongs.
I'll get the tongs.
Oftentimes, people are looking for those classic grill marks, or diamonds as some people call them, but then they don't allow the grill to get hot enough and then move the meat too often. Girl Carnivore's Keita Roberts had this to say, "It's a classic mistake, and the signature grill marks don't set in and you end up letting too much heat out while trying to manipulate the steak. To master those grill marks, you must make sure the grill is hot enough. Instead of placing the steaks right on the grill, allow it to come to temperature for 15 to 20 minutes beforehand. The grill needs to be holding heat, and the grate needs to be hot enough to sear the meat initially, creating the classic crosshatch." Roberts says, "Once the steak hits the searing hot grates, close the lid and ignore it for 1 minute. Rotate 45 degrees and then wait another minute before flipping the steak. The thicker the steak, the longer the cooking time. But on average, for a 1-inch steak, that 1-minute trick is perfect to nail the signature grill mark we all want when not cooking in cast iron but over a grill. This trick works whether you are cooking directly over the coals or doing a reverse sear." Grilling is associated with summer, and summer means fresh flavors. What better way to appreciate that than to use herbs from your garden? Michael Ollier, the senior corporate chef for the certified Angus beef brand, agrees. He said, "Summer is the season for fresh herbs and spices. Build flavors to enhance the overall taste and presentation of your steak with what you already have." One idea is to build a brush with herbs from around your house. Add some oil and baste the grates on your grill with the mixture for added flavor. Ollier suggests to dip into a bowl of your favorite oil and brush directly onto the grates. The heat will awaken the herbs and bring out their aromas. Another idea is to rest your grilled steaks on top of your favorite chopped herbs and olive oil to automatically create a board dressing. That way, the heat from the steak will activate the flavors from the herbs. This will infuse the fresh taste with the robust beef flavor. One of the biggest mistakes people make when grilling a steak is cutting into it to see if it's done while it's still cooking. It's understandable why it may seem like a helpful thing to do, but it's a disaster for that meat. Jessica Randhawa, head chef and creator of the Forked Spoon, says, "Cooking meat to a safe temperature is not only critical in the food safety for your family and friends, but it is also easy with cheap, modern technology. We have the technology to help us be better cooks, and the digital meat thermometer is probably my #1 must-have for the kitchen." Steak, along with poultry, fish, and pork, can now be cooked to perfection without having to guess and cut into the meat, which causes the loss of both moisture and nutrients. Most readily available meat thermometers can be purchased for $10, and some even have the temperatures for the various meats printed right on the thermometer. Nothing kills a steak more than not giving it a few minutes to rest. If you cut your steak right away, you'll let all of the flavorful juices run out. Letting the steak rest allows the juices to reabsorb into the meat, creating tender, juicy bites. You shouldn't need more than 10 minutes. If you have foil on hand, it's best to create a tent around your steak to keep the heat in while it rests. Once it's rested, slice it up and dig in. Leaving your steak be will also allow the juices to thicken slightly as they cool, so when you go to slice your steak, you don't have the juices spilling out everywhere. The secret to a good steak is controlling the moisture. Too much moisture will result in a gray, sad-looking steak instead. If you want your steak to get a nice sear on the grill, pat drying it is crucial, and it's as easy as the name implies. Just take some paper towels and use them to firmly pat the meat on both sides before seasoning and searing. You want all the flavor you can get, but you want that without drawing out the meat's moisture. Pat drying is a great way to get that meat to have a beautiful sear and a gorgeous crust. Don't skip this important step. Remember, people eat with their eyes first, so presentation is everything. Once you have your coals and the grill searing hot, go ahead and throw it on and just let it be for a bit. An interesting mistake people make is that they flip their steak constantly, fearing it will char and overcook. You don't have to do all that to prevent overcooking. Instead, leave the steak face down for about 4 minutes and let a crust build before you flip to the other side. When you flip, you're finishing the steak and waiting for it to reach your desired internal temperature. Leonard Botello, pitmaster and owner of Truth Barbecue in Texas, says, "I prefer medium rare, so I will usually pull around 125 to 130 degrees internally. At the end of the cook, right about 5 degrees lower than my pull temp, I like to flip the steak every minute until it reaches 125. You must still be careful though, because the temperature will spike, and you can easily overcook or burn your meat. And cutting right after is also not a good idea." Botello says, "Once you have pulled at your desired temperature, let the steak rest for a minimum of 10 minutes. If you cut into it too soon, all the rendered fats will pour out of the steak, and the steak will oxidize or dry out very fast. The rest ensures the fats soak back into the steak, giving you a very juicy bite."
The Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious.
Using great beef in burgers is a fairly divisive choice. Some experts caution against it, such as Katie Flannery, co-owner of Flannery Beef, who dubbed it sacrilegious to grind up spendy steaks like ribeye or filet. Justin Owens, owner of Manzo Piedmontese, agrees, telling us, "The first time I heard about people doing this was when a friend picked up some really expensive tenderloins and then told the butcher to grind them, who nearly had a heart attack upon hearing the request. And when he told me, I almost had a stroke. For Flannery, this is purely a waste of money," she explained. Your average consumer would be hard-pressed to tell the difference between a burger made of ground ribeye compared to one made of ground chuck-eye, though the price tag would be significantly different. This isn't to say you can't shell out for top-notch burger meat, provided you know what to ask for. Braising cuts like chuck or brisket have loads of flavor, which will come through in the final mince. For example, chef and owner of Thistle and Grouse, Bobby Will, loves using a mix of chuck, brisket, and short rib for the perfect ratio of texture and flavor in his burger patties. Paying a bit more for dry-aged prime or lusciously marbled Wagyu, according to Chef Michael Paley, executive steakhouse chef at Prime 54, also adds, quote, "a great depth of flavor and umami to the burger." By far the most egregious error cited by our pros is overcooking a good steak. Rusty Pelican Miami executive chef Fiorella Cornejo explained, "The most heinous way you can ruin an expensive steak is by ordering it well done."
What if somebody wants theirs well done?
We ask them politely yet firmly to leave.
This, Flannery says, is due to the way in which overcooking affects the texture of the meat. She explained that expensive steaks are generally sought after for their tender quality, saying, "When you overcook a steak, you cause the muscle fibers of the meat to tighten, creating an incredibly tough end result. Since there are other cuts of steak that are inherently tender, it's blasphemous to take a tender cut and deliberately turn it tough." If you ask Chef Michael Vignola, director of culinary at Fetch Hospitality Group, erring on the side of undercooking is best. He explained, "I do not think it is possible to undercook a steak. I personally believe the redder the better. I love it raw. But even for those who don't share Vignola's tastes, the quality of the beef just shines when it's properly cooked," as Paley explained. The higher the quality, one can experience more layers of flavor and complexity as you bite through a great crust with a rare to medium rare interior. Despite Vignola's insistence, many would argue undercooking a steak isn't a great idea either. As Flannery explained, lots of people enjoy raw steak in the form of steak tartare, and others like steak cooked to a rare 120 degrees. However, there is a much smaller market for people who enjoy beef between those two temperatures. Will echoed Flannery's point. He noted that without the Maillard reaction, which occurs when high heat from searing or grilling caramelizes the proteins on the outside of the steak, you'd be hard-pressed to gain the rich, savory flavor you expect from a well-cooked steak. And the texture of an undercooked steak, which Flannery characterized as rubbery, isn't ideal either. According to Guara Pimenta, executive chef of Vela Seaport, undercooking is even worse when it comes to fattier cuts of steak like a ribeye or tomahawk. He maintains that these steaks demand a somewhat higher cooking temperature that will allow you to better render the fat. That said, for Cornejo, this one ultimately comes down to personal preference. She observed, "My favorite way to cook a steak is medium rare. Some people may think that is undercooked, and some people may think it is overcooked. It just depends on what you prefer." For some professional chefs like Cornejo, freezing steaks is never a great idea, but others say there's a time and a place for the practice. As Paley explained, "I would not recommend this, but if you are purchasing a large amount of Kobe beef, for example, and can't eat it all in one sitting, freezing it is okay as long as it is tightly wrapped." Vignola notes that not only can freezing halt the aging process, but it can make steaks even more tender if done correctly. He explained, "If done properly in cryovac and thawed properly, I do not think it is a bad idea." Flannery echoed this belief, though she noted that other attributes such as color stability are negatively affected by the process. Pimenta offered another suggestion, saying, "To keep from ruining the steak, it is important to wrap the piece of meat tightly in a vacuum-sealed bag to avoid freezer burn." Pimenta also noted that how you defrost a steak is just as important as how you freeze it. He recommends submerging the frozen steak in cold water while it's still in its vacuum-sealed bag. Will, meanwhile, recommends placing the bag in the fridge to let it come to temperature slowly, saying, "Rushing it under water will cause it to lose a lot of the texture and moisture. Do not defrost in a microwave." While a well-seasoned steak is a delicious thing, it's certainly possible to go overboard. As Flannery explained, there is absolutely too much of a good thing. Overseasoning a steak will overpower the natural flavor of the meat and lead to an unbalanced taste. Will says this holds particularly true with overpowering spice rubs, something he sees done all too often by many of his fellow chefs. While he's in favor of certain rubs, such as blackening spice or a classic French au poivre, taco seasoning or pastrami spice are major no-nos with expensive steaks in particular. For his part, Pimenta explained he relies on a simple combo of salt, pepper, and just a touch of sugar to help the steak caramelize. Paley keeps things even simpler, noting that crunchy salt is really all you need. As he explained, overseasoning also comes into danger of the seasoned crust burning on the grill, which will kill the taste of the meat. However, even plain salt can be overdone, according to Owens and Vignola. Owens noted that he's noticed many diners prefer the subtle flavors of a milder flavored meat, saying, "Adventurous eaters may be more vocal about a flat, bland, or boring taste." He went on to observe that chefs and clients alike generally enjoy the pure beefiness of a minimally seasoned steak. The word steak encompasses a host of cuts from lean tenderloin to fatty prime rib and everything in between. With all of this variety, it should come as no surprise that each steak demands its own particular brand of TLC. As Vignola noted, a steak that's microwaved versus slowly cooked over a mesquite is going to be very different. I could argue the cooking method is more important than the steak itself. Pimenta elaborated, saying, "Some cuts are best grilled, seared, and even roasted, while others must be braised. So definitely choose your method of cooking before you start any prep." For Will, flank or skirt steak demands the smokiness of a hickory wood-fueled grill or charcoal, while he prefers searing a fillet in a hot cast iron pan and finishing it in the oven with butter, thyme, and garlic. He takes care to baste the steak when it emerges to ensure that it's gleaming brilliantly. And at Vela Seaport, Pimenta says, "We grill skirt steak as it's one of the most flavorful cuts of beef, and it is a great steak for grilling." Once you've lovingly thawed, seasoned, and cooked your top-notch steak, it would be tempting to dig right in. But despite the enticing aromas and tantalizing sizzle, attacking a fresh off-the-grill steak with a knife is a major faux pas. According to Vignola, by not allowing the steak to rest before cutting it, you're inviting it to bleed all over, potentially resulting in dry steak. Instead, once your steak is finished, set it on a plate or board and cover it loosely with foil so that the juices can redistribute within the meat. As for how long it should rest, 5 minutes per inch of thickness or 10 minutes per pound are great benchmarks. Once you've let your steak rest the appropriate amount, you should have no issue carving it up and digging in. Steak is always at its best when fresh, but should you end up with leftovers, do not write them off.
Well, it is leftover night. We have steak, pasta. What are you hungry for?
Tony Ridinger.
Flannery suggests leaving any leftover steak in whole pieces and refrigerating overnight, for chilling it like this will make cutting the meat into thin slices easier. Haley likes to enjoy leftover steak on a salad, and Flannery loves a steak sandwich. And of course, leftover steak doesn't always have to be eaten cold, as Owen suggested. My personal favorite is thinly slicing and lightly reheating the steak in a pan or toaster oven. Depending on breakfast or lunch, I'll make a sandwich or have it with eggs and toast. Haley also likes the idea of steak tacos, while Cornejo is a fan of using steak in empanadas. Pimenta loves transforming leftover steak into a steak and potato soup, and Will likes using it to bulk up a cold noodle salad with sesame ginger dressing. The point is, a steak's lifespan does not end the day you cook it, and once it's already cooked, you have even more time to get creative with it.
Let's face it, nothing breaks the heart like badly cooked beef. Fear not, though. These tips and tricks will help you rustle up beef tenderloin like the best of them. If you say tenderloin, most people will assume you're talking about beef. But steers aren't the only animals with a tenderloin muscle. Your average butcher shop or meat counter is also likely to offer pork tenderloin and even chicken tenderloin, otherwise known as chicken tenders. Both of these meats are exactly as tender as their name suggests. But even if you zero in on beef from the get-go, there are a few missteps you can make at the starting line. First off, it's important to know the difference between beef tenderloin and filet mignon. The latter is the tenderest part of the tenderloin, located at the very end of the muscle, and is generally the most sought-after part of the cut. It's usually more expensive than other cuts of beef and can also be confused with other, less tender beef fillets if you don't examine the packaging carefully. Even after you found the right cut in the butcher case, there are a few things you can check for to ensure you've got the best of the best. Matthew Creeder, executive chef of Steak 954, suggests, always buy your steaks from someone you trust. I prefer not to buy mine from big-name grocers. Find a butcher or a grocer with a good program that can tell you where your steak is coming from. Meanwhile, Aki Suzuki, general manager of American Cut, notes that you can guarantee an even more flavorful steak by looking for a bright red color with fine marbling. Once you've found the perfect steak, it's time to get cooking, right?
I'm gonna fire up the grill and all set!
Well, not quite. Depending on where you bought your beef tenderloin, it may require a bit of trimming first. Often, beef tenderloin is sold already cleaned or even sliced into medallions ready for cooking, but a whole beef tenderloin includes not just the tenderloin itself, but also a fair amount of silver skin and excess fat, not to mention the chain muscle. All of this must be trimmed before cooking. If you've got the whole thing, about 30% of the tenderloin will need to be removed before you even start cooking. Obviously, that may seem like a lot of extra work, as well as quite a bit of waste for a cut that tends to sell for a whopping $30 a pound. But don't even think about throwing these valuable pieces of meat away. While they might not cook up quite like beef tenderloin, there's loads of flavor in these trimmings. The chain muscle can be chopped and sautéed to be enjoyed in steak fajitas, or a Chinese takeout-inspired beef and broccoli stir-fry, for example, while the other trimmings can be used to make stock, broth, or ground into burger meat. Lean beef trimmings also provide a decent start for your next sauce. Consider using them to make a rich, delicious no-drippings gravy to serve with your tenderloin, or cooking them down into a luscious au jus. Once you've trimmed the tenderloin, there's another essential step required to get it ready for cooking: tempering. Many chefs agree that beef is happiest when cooked not from fridge temperature, but rather from room temperature. This helps ensure even doneness throughout. While the thought process behind tempering beef certainly makes sense, not all experts are in agreement about it. A little while back, Serious Eats tested this theory by bringing one steak to room temperature before cooking it and cooking another from fridge temperature. They found that it barely made a difference to the doneness of each. And if you ask the USDA, from a food safety perspective, you never want to leave any meat out of the fridge for longer than 2 hours. So when it comes to this tempering tip, feel free to follow our experts' advice if you like. But if you forget, don't worry too much. Depending on how you're cooking your beef tenderloin, you may want to break out the butcher's twine before getting started. Aki Suzuki points out that tying your roast will help it cook evenly. though adds that this method is only really necessary if you're cooking the tenderloin as a whole roast. He says, for filet mignon, tying is usually unnecessary unless you want to maintain a perfect round shape. That said, Matthew Creeder says that a more uniform shape isn't just about aesthetics. He claims that a nice round shape can also contribute to a more uniform cook, adding, you can cook these steaks without it. However, it can be a nice touch. So how do you go about this? You'll want to tie loops about every inch using one continuous strand of butcher's twine. It can take a bit of time to get the hang of it, so it's best to rely on an expert like Martha Stewart, who has a great video showing you how to manage this at home.
So this is how you do it. Isn't that nice and neat?
If you find yourself at a loss, a good butcher should be able to take care of this step for you, which is all the more reason to seek out a top-notch vendor when sourcing your beef tenderloin. Beef tenderloin is a very tender steak, of that you can be sure. But as is often the case, its tenderness is inversely related to its richness and flavor. To put it bluntly, beef tenderloin can be a bit blander than some of its more marbled cousins. As a result, it's even more important to get a lovely brown char on the outside of the steak than it is with other cuts of beef, as the Maillard reaction will help bring out even more of its flavor. The one thing that has the potential to get in your way? Moisture. Vanessa Parrish, private chef and executive director of Queer Food Foundation, explains, you do not want that layer of moisture between the sear and the steak. It causes that moisture to evaporate once it hits the skillet and can turn your steak gray. I hate to see a steak lose that nice crust opportunity, so be sure to pat your steak dry thoroughly with paper towels before cooking it, or do as Matthew Creeder does, and go one step further. He says, I like to air dry my steaks overnight so they get a much nicer crust. This can easily be done by placing the steak on a rack set over a baking dish and setting it in the fridge overnight. Beef tenderloin is a relatively lean cut, which means that it can be a heart-healthy choice. But from a flavor standpoint, if you're looking to bring out all of its richness, adding a bit of fat never hurts.
Butter.
While Matthew Creeder claims that you don't need a lot of fat to cook tenderloins, he does note that finishing with a bit of fat adds loads of flavor. He says, I love to baste mine in some brown butter with a garlic clove and thyme, and gilding the lily with a round of compound butter is a great way to push its tastiness up to 11. Kayleen Gusso, executive chef at Lafayette Steakhouse in Miami, Florida, agrees. He says, since these cuts are very lean, it is advisable to add some fat, such as butter or oil, to prevent them from drying out during cooking and to enhance their flavor. Personally, I love using butter to enhance the rich flavor of the steak. But while butter may well be the perfect finishing fat, it's actually not the best choice when it comes to cooking the steak itself. For that, you'll want to use a fat that can stand fairly high temperatures, such as canola or avocado oil. These fats have a high enough smoke point to achieve the perfect sear on your steak without burning it. The last essential element when it comes to getting the perfect crust on the outside of your steak is the temperature at which you cook it. Cooking beef at a fairly high temperature is the best way to get a lovely browned exterior, explains Matthew Creeder. This goes especially when it comes to leaner steaks like tenderloin, which are easier to overcook than fattier steaks such as ribeye. Creeder says, I always cook leaner steaks like this quickly so as not to overcook them and to get a nice sear. Aki Suzuki agrees, noting that he prefers a double-barreled approach when cooking beef tenderloin. He suggests, start with a high temperature to sear and create a crust, then finish at a lower temperature, in the oven, to ensure even cooking. Using a cast iron skillet is probably the best approach here, as they are known for their ability to retain high temperatures. Given the mild flavor of beef tenderloin, it's essential to season it well with salt and pepper. As a rule of thumb for seasoning steak, a tablespoon of salt for every pound of meat is a good bet. But when should you do this? Some prefer to season their meat, hours or even 2 days in advance. This approach ensures that the salt will penetrate the crust and into the meat itself. But if you haven't had time to season quite that far in advance, be warned, there's a window where seasoning early can actually cause you problems. By and large, if you season up to 40 minutes before cooking, you're probably in the clear. Any later than that, however, and seasoning early will only bring moisture to the surface of the meat, making it difficult for the perfect brown crust to form. If you haven't had a chance to season your beef tenderloin well in advance, it's best to season just before cooking. No one likes overcooked steak, but it's particularly unappealing when it comes to beef tenderloin, since the cut's lack of fat can make it doubly dry if too well done. And to add insult to injury, its lack of fat makes beef tenderloin even more susceptible to accidental overcooking than many other cuts of steak. Matthew Creeder says, it can be extremely easy to overcook these steaks. There is not a lot of fat in them, so they will cook faster and rest further than, let's say, a strip loin or a ribeye. You can use a meat thermometer to gauge whether beef has reached the ideal medium rare temperature, 130 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Vanessa Parrish offers another suggestion, though, cooking tenderloin as a roast, which she says can be more forgiving than cooking them from start to finish in a pan. Once you've cooked beef tenderloin to perfection, it can be tempting to dig right in. Resist that urge, though. It's essential that any cooked steak rests before carving to ensure that the juices can redistribute inside the meat. Matthew Creeder tells us, always rest your steaks. Please always rest your steaks. Your steak deserves it. You deserve it. It will be so much more tender and juicier if you let it rest. As for how long to rest your meat, Aki Suzuki recommends at least 5 to 10 minutes, though the actual time can depend on the size of the steak. Thinner cuts can rest for a mere 5 to 7 minutes, while thicker steaks and roasts may need to rest 10 minutes or up to 20. As a rule of thumb, Creeder recommends a resting time of between a third and half of the original cook time. Tenting steak loosely with foil will keep it from going cold without allowing too much moisture to build up and softening that crispy crust you worked so hard to develop. While the steak rests, you've got just enough time to whip up a delicious sauce. Purists may scoff, but a top-notch sauce can push the flavors of mild-mannered beef tenderloin to total perfection. Matthew Creeder even terms this particular steak a sauce sponge, noting that a wide variety of sauces can suit it perfectly. Some of the best sauces to serve with beef tenderloin are pan sauces, which take full advantage of all of the flavorful fond left in the bottom of the pan after cooking. Bring up this fond using cognac for the beginnings of a classic au poivre sauce, or use red wine and cook it down by half before emulsifying it with butter to make a tasty red wine reduction.
You know what? I am gonna have that third steak after all. Go ahead and put that order in now, please and thank you.
But pan sauces aren't your only option. Horseradish-infused creme fraiche is a classic sauce to serve with roast beef that goes just as well with beef tenderloin, while a classic béarnaise sauce adds all the richness this steak needs to take it to the next level. If you want something a bit lighter, an Argentinian-inspired chimichurri complete with fresh herbs and acid can be the perfect pairing.